True Home Alone horror stories. The Williams family decided to move into a cheap old house that Mr. Williams had just bought from an unknown broker. When the Williams family first moved into the old house in Savannah, Georgia, they had no idea they were walking into a nightmare. The house was isolated in a dense forest covered with vines and old trees. From the first day they moved in, the family felt something was wrong. The air in the house was always damp and heavy, even though the windows were always open to let in the light. The wooden floor creaked under every step as if something was lurking from below. When Sarah, her 8-year-old daughter, went up to the attic, she accidentally discovered an old music box stuffed into the corner of the wall. The box's surface was burned black, and on the lid was a picture of a little girl with a pale face and empty eyes. Despite the rusted mechanism, Sarah opened the box curiously. But instead of music, a cold wind blew from inside the box against her face, making her shiver. That night, the whole family was awakened by the sound of music coming from the music box. Despite David's careful inspection and knowing that it was not working, the eerie melody continued to echo throughout the house. When David and his wife ran up to the attic, they were horrified to find the music box spinning on its own. And, even more strangely, the cooing of a child could be heard coming from inside. The music became even colder and more piercing the next night. Sarah also began to act strangely. She would stand motionless in front of the mirror for hours, sometimes whispering strange things. She told me she was lonely. I have to help her find her mother. One night, Sarah told her parents, "She doesn't like you here. She says you have to go." But no one cared about the little girl's words. When the family doesn't leave, the supernatural phenomena escalate. At first, it's small things, lights flickering constantly. The closet doors opened by themselves, and the pictures on the wall were turned upside down. But then, things got worse. One night, Sarah disappeared from her bedroom. David and his wife found her sitting in the attic, facing the open music box. Sarah pointed to the corner of the room and said, "She's standing right there, Dad. Can't you see her?" David looked and felt goosebumps rise on his skin. In the dark corner, he could vaguely see a small figure, a little girl with empty eyes and a wild smile. He quickly carried Sarah downstairs, but an invisible hand pulled the music box closer, causing it to open its lid and play a creepy music. The next day, David invited an exorcist to his house. As soon as the exorcist entered, he immediately shuddered. "This house is cursed, and the spirit doesn't want to leave." During the exorcism, things took a terrible turn. A strong wind blew out all the windows, even though there was no storm outside. The music box started to play automatically, and its melody gradually turned into a mournful cry. Suddenly, Sarah cried out and said in a different voice, "They abandoned me. Don't let them abandon me again." The little girl's face twisted, her eyes turned white, and a savage laugh rang out from her mouth. The exorcist shouted, "The soul of this child has been imprisoned in the music box. It is not simply an object, it is a curse from death." On their last night in the house, the Williams family knew they were running out of time. The ghost of the little girl was becoming more and more visible, her footsteps echoing down the hallways. Sarah said that the little girl wanted to go into the bedroom with them. As the family packed up to leave, the music box opened by itself one last time. The shrill music echoed throughout the house, accompanied by crying and screaming. The furniture in the house shook crazily, and from the mirror, the figure of the little girl with empty eyes appeared, slowly outside. The family ran to the car, but Sarah suddenly collapsed as soon as they stepped out the door. She stared into space and whispered, "She's here, right next to me." David panicked, pulled his daughter into the car, and sped off into the night. As the car sped away, they looked back in the rearview mirror and saw the little girl standing in front of the house, still holding the spinning music box. The Williams family never returned to that house. They moved away, but Sarah was never the same innocent girl again. She would talk to someone invisible and still hear the melody from the music box every night, even though it had been left behind. One day, when David walked into Sarah's room, he found her sitting in front of a new music box that they had never bought. She turned to him and whispered, "Daddy, she found me." And the music box started spinning again, playing that familiar creepy tune. In 2021, Thomas Miller, a well-known collector of antique watches, purchased a strange watch from a mobile garage sale in the suburbs of New Orleans. Thomas was fascinated by items with mysterious histories, and as soon as he saw this watch, he knew he had found something unique. It was a grandfather clock with a jet black dial, framed in a dark wooden frame covered in ancient, incomprehensible symbols. Its glass was cracked, as if something had tried to escape from within. Although the seller warned that the watch does not keep normal time, Thomas took it as a joke, which only added to his excitement. He took the clock home and hung it in the attic, where he kept dozens of other antique clocks. But from the very first night, the peace in Thomas's house was shattered. At 3 Lemme, Thomas woke up to a soft tapping sound coming from the attic. It sounded like someone was trying to tap from inside the clock. He tried to ignore it and thought it was just the wind or the creaking sound of wood. But the sound kept repeating itself every night right at 3 a.m, and he started to feel that something was very strange. One night, Thomas couldn't stand it anymore and decided to go upstairs to check. When he went up, he saw the face of the grandfather clock was wide open. The cracked glass cracked even more, as if a hand from within had pushed it apart. The clock ticked slowly, but strangely, every time the second hand moved, Thomas felt a part of his memory being eroded. A few days later, Thomas began to experience gaps in his memory. Sometimes he forgets what he was doing just a few minutes ago. Sometimes he found himself standing in the attic without remembering when he got there. But what was even more terrifying was that he began to see strange events. Some of the clocks in his house ran backwards, while others stopped at exactly 3 a.m. One night, when Thomas woke up to get a drink of water, he saw his reflection in the mirror, but the mirror's counterpart moved a beat slower than his, as if time had been stretched. His reflection in the mirror even smiled strangely, even though he wasn't smiling. Panicked, Thomas contacted an antiques expert, hoping to learn more about the watch. After studying it, the expert warned that this watch was more than just a timepiece. It was a tool for imprisoning souls. Every time the clock runs, it steals time and memories from its owner until their soul is trapped inside forever. Thomas panicked even more upon hearing this, for he now understood why the watch's crystal had cracked. The previous owners had tried to escape but had failed. That night, Thomas decided to take the clock down and destroy it. But as soon as he put his hand on the face of the clock, the hand suddenly spun wildly, making a whistling sound and causing the lights in the house to flicker. Before he could react, darkness enveloped him. Thomas woke up at 3 a.m. He found himself standing in the attic, but everything in the house seemed to have changed. The clocks around him stopped ticking, and in the dead silence, he heard the raucous laughter of the grandfather clock. When he looked at the clock face, Thomas saw himself reflected in it. But his face was old and distorted, as if decades had passed. He realized with horror that his time had been stolen, and he was now a ghost trapped in the face of the clock. Thomas was never seen again. His house was abandoned, and those who dared to enter reported hearing a strange ticking sound at exactly 3 a.m. every night. Others claimed to have seen Thomas's face reflected in old clocks, as if he were calling for help from another world. The mobile vending cart where Thomas bought the watch has also disappeared without a trace. And now, rumors are circulating that the watch is still waiting for its next owner, someone who will take it home and unleash a never-ending nightmare. In the fall of 2015, Daniel, a young man, moves into his grandmother's old house in Virginia after she passes away. This house was built in the early 20th century and is located in the suburbs, surrounded by only a few scattered houses. From the moment he entered the house, Daniel felt a heavy atmosphere, as if something was lurking within the old walls. Daniel's grandmother had lived here alone for many years, and she never let anyone into the attic. But Daniel, with his curiosity, decided to explore every corner of the house, starting with the mysterious attic that his grandmother always kept secret. As Daniel climbed up to the attic, he had to use all his strength to open the heavy old door, causing the creaking sound to echo throughout the house. The attic was dark and cold, with cobwebs everywhere. Amidst the clutter, a wooden chest was stuffed deep into a dark corner, as if it had been intentionally hidden. He pulled the chest out and opened it. Inside, the first thing that caught his eye was a large portrait of a woman in a black dress. But her face was scratched off. The lines were so deep and distorted that it was impossible to recognize who it was. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at the portrait, but he still thought it was just a damaged ancient painting. After putting the portrait aside, Daniel went downstairs. That night, the nightmare began. At around 2:30 a.m., Daniel was awakened by the sound of heavy footsteps walking back and forth across the ceiling just above his bedroom. The footsteps were steady and deliberate, as if someone were patrolling the attic. Daniel sat up, his heart pounding. He listened in fear and told himself that the old house could make strange sounds. But the next night, things got even more terrifying. The footsteps didn't stop at the ceiling. They started coming down the stairs, step by step. The footsteps were slow and heavy, echoing in the silent night. Daniel felt his whole body stiffen. He turned on the bedroom light, but there was no one else in the house. The footsteps continued to echo, getting closer to the door. Suddenly, the bedroom door opened. And a cold air rushed in, carrying with it a musty and putrid smell. As Daniel sat on the bed in a panic, he saw a figure appear in the darkness in the corner of the room. It was a woman in a black dress, just like the portrait. But the horrifying thing was that her face was blank, just a blank white space. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Her thin arms hung limply at her sides, while a hoarse breathing sounded faintly from somewhere. She walked closer to Daniel, each step a heavy sound that pounded his mind. The musty smell grew stronger, making him want to suffocate. When the woman was only a few steps away, she stopped and whispered in a cold voice, "Where is my face?" Daniel felt his throat close up. He couldn't scream, couldn't move. His body was frozen in terror. The woman reached up, touched her blank face, then slowly reached out toward Daniel as if to take his face away. In a panic, Daniel jumped up and rushed out of the room. He took nothing but the pajamas he was wearing. The footsteps of the faceless woman echoed behind him. Following her every step as if she had no intention of stopping. Daniel ran down the stairs, feeling as if the darkness in the house was suffocating him. As he flung open the front door and rushed out. The cold wind whipped at his face, but he didn't stop. He jumped into his car and sped off into the night, not daring to look back once. In the rearview mirror, he swore he saw the shadow of the woman standing in front of the house, staring after him, her blank face a silent threat. Daniel never returned to his grandmother's house. He rented a new apartment in the city, trying to forget everything that had happened. But the obsession did not let him go. Every night at 2:30 in the morning, he still heard footsteps walking across the ceiling. Sometimes he would look in the mirror and feel like his face was distorted, as if someone was trying to erase it. One day, Daniel receives a call from his grandmother's old neighbor, who says that his grandmother had also encountered the faceless woman and that she had scratched the portrait in an attempt to keep her spirit from returning. But the curse in the attic never goes away. It just passes on to the next owner. Daniel knew that the faceless woman would not stop until she had his face. He began to lose control, gradually feeling like his face was being erased in the mirror every day. Even though he had left that house, the ghost of the woman still followed him, waiting for the right moment to replace her lost face. One rainy night, Daniel looked into the mirror and saw his face completely gone. Reflected in the mirror was a faceless woman with her arms outstretched, laughing in the darkness. Daniel became the next victim of the curse in the attic. In the fall of 1900, in the small town of Briar Hollow, there was a legend that few people still talked about. Train number 1900 had mysteriously disappeared decades earlier, along with all its passengers. No one knew why. But on foggy nights, locals swear they can hear the train whistle echoing in the distance, as if the train is still gliding through space, never to arrive. Thomas Harlan, a young ticket inspector who has just arrived at Briar Hollow Station, does not believe in the ancient legends. However, the townspeople had warned him never to board trains that were not scheduled on dark nights, especially when fog had blanketed the station. But Thomas, with his youthful curiosity, thought that this was just a rumor to scare newcomers. One night, while working the late shift, Thomas received a strange message via telegraph. A special train would stop at midnight. He found it strange because there was no record of this train. But because of his job responsibilities, he waited, despite his doubts. As predicted, at midnight, an old train emerged from the thick fog. The dim light from the oil lamps reflected through the windows, making the train seem like it had just come from another world. The whole scene was eerie and gloomy. The old machine made strange creaking sounds, as if it did not belong to this era. Thomas stepped out onto the platform to check, his eyes glued to the train. The darkness prevented him from seeing inside, but strangely, there were no voices, no passengers getting off the train. The train doors opened slowly, emitting an eerie creaking sound. Everything was so quiet that Thomas could hear his heart beating in his chest. He boarded the train with some trepidation and began checking each compartment. At first, everything seemed normal, just empty rows of seats, a little dusty. But when he got to the third compartment, he began to realize that something was wrong. There were suitcases, coats, and hats on each seat, but no people. Those personal belongings seemed to have been abandoned in the panic. Thomas walked to the next car, feeling an eerie chill. A strong, musty smell filled the air, along with a slight stench, as if something had long since rotted. He shivered slightly, walking slowly towards the door at the end of the car. When the door opened, a horrifying sight appeared before my eyes. The passengers sat there, but they were all motionless, their skin as pale as corpses. Their eyes were wide with horror, as if they had seen something terrible before they took their last breath. They did not move, but their eyes seemed to follow him. Panic gripped Thomas. He turned to run from the train, but the doors behind him had already closed. Murmurs filled the air, broken whispers. He tried to listen, but only caught vague whispers, as if the ghostly passengers were talking to each other. The train suddenly moved. Thomas stumbled and fell to the floor. He looked out the window in horror, watching the train move along, across vast meadows and over hills. But strangely, he could no longer recognize the outside world. Instead of Briar Hollow, he saw only black forests, the trees stretching out their branches in strange shapes as if trying to cling to the train. A groan came from the front of the car. Thomas gritted his teeth, trying to stay calm, and continued to walk towards the front of the train, where he believed the conductor could help him. But when he got there, he saw a figure in a black cloak standing in front of the cabin. The conductor turned around, and Thomas felt his eyes deep, empty, and lifeless. He said nothing, just pointed to the dashboard with a long-stopped clock, the hands stationary at 12. Thomas stepped back, realizing that this was no ordinary train. This was train number 1900, the legendary lost train, but it never stopped. Suddenly, the lights in the train flickered and went out. Everything was plunged into darkness. Footsteps sounded closer. But this time, it wasn't Thomas's. Shadowy figures were coming toward him from the darkness. The ghostly passengers had come back to life, and they wanted a new companion. Thomas felt extreme fear, trying to escape from this nightmare, but the train kept moving, gliding through space and time, never stopping. In the darkness, wild laughter rang out. Mixed with the sound of the wheels grinding on the tracks as a reminder that the ghost train will forever pass through the forgotten lands, never to stop. And from that night, no one has seen Thomas Harlan again. Occasionally, the people of Briar Hollow still hear the train whistle blowing through the thick fog, and they know that the 1900 train continues its journey, carrying the souls imprisoned forever. True Home Alone horror stories. Maria is a young woman living in Los Angeles, a busy and energetic city. She loves the hustle and bustle of life here, but after a long day of stressful work at the office, she often looks for quiet places to relax. Griffith Park is Maria's favorite destination. Located in the heart of downtown Los Angeles, this park brings a sense of peace, covered with vast forests. deserted trails and open spaces of natural land. Maria often jogs in the park in the evening. It is the most peaceful time of the day for her, when the sounds of the city gradually fade away, leaving only the wind blowing through the trees and the gentle footsteps on the dirt path. Running not only helps her relieve stress, but also helps her stay healthy. Griffith Park is a place where she can temporarily escape the hustle and bustle of Los Angeles. One night, Maria decided to go for a run later than usual. Work at the office had taken longer than expected, causing her to leave work late. It was dusk by the time she reached the park. The cool autumn air and the dim lights in the distance made the atmosphere a little gloomy, but Maria didn't mind. She was used to this park and felt safe. Her footsteps lightly brushed along the path, the crunch of dry leaves under her feet echoing in the quiet space. Everything was normal like any other day until Maria felt something strange. She felt like someone was watching her. The feeling was not clear at first, but gradually it became heavier. Her natural instinct made her stop, turn around, and look around, but she saw nothing but darkness and silent bushes. Maria felt a little nervous, but tried to calm herself down. It's probably just a feeling, she thought, and continued running. However, a few minutes later, the feeling of being followed returned, stronger this time. Every step she took seemed to be echoed by a small sound, as if someone was following her. This time, Maria turned around immediately, and her heart stopped when she saw a tall man standing about 20 meters away from her. He was dressed in black, not moving, just standing there, staring at her. Maria panicked, trying to calm herself. She thought about screaming or running faster, but she didn't want to cause panic and confusion. Maybe it was just someone walking around at night like her. She turned and ran again, but this time her heart was pounding. Her breathing was faster. She ran faster, hoping to leave the park sooner than usual. Maria is a young woman living in Los Angeles, a busy and energetic city. She loves the hustle and bustle of life here, but after a long day of stressful work at the office, she often looks for quiet places to relax. Griffith Park is Maria's favorite destination. Located in the heart of downtown Los Angeles, this park brings a sense of peace, covered with vast forests, deserted trails, and open spaces of natural land. The mysterious man's figure disappeared strangely. Maria stood still, not understanding what was happening. The wind blew gently through the rustling branches. The surrounding space became colder, making her feel unsafe. Maria decided not to continue running. She slowly walked off the path and quickly walked towards the parking lot. But the closer she got to the exit, the more she felt like someone was following her. The footsteps continued to echo, even though Maria could not see anyone. As she exited the trail and entered the parking lot, Maria turned around one last time. She couldn't believe her eyes. The man in black appeared again, this time standing right in the middle of the trail, just a few dozen meters away from her. His face was still unclear in the darkness, but Maria sensed something dark and evil emanating from him. Panicking, Maria jumped into the car and slammed the door shut. She quickly started the car, feeling uneasy. As the car started moving, she looked back in the rearview mirror and saw the man's figure disappear again, as if he had never existed. Maria's whole body trembled, and she knew that what she had just experienced was not normal. After returning home, Maria tried to forget this strange incident at Griffith Park. She told a few friends about it, but no one believed her completely. They thought it was just a prank or a haunting feeling due to fatigue. However, Maria could not get the image of that man and the feeling of being followed away. Soon, Maria decided to investigate Griffith Park and the ghost stories surrounding it. She discovered that the park had been the site of many mysterious events, including murders and accidents. One of the most haunting stories was about a tramp who was brutally murdered in the park many years ago. It is said that his spirit still roams the area, especially on dark nights when the park is most deserted. Maria couldn't help but think of the man in black she had seen. Perhaps it was the spirit of that wanderer, forever restless, and continued to wander Griffith Park in search of release. After that night, Maria never dared to return to the park alone at night. What she had experienced was a reminder that there are things that cannot be explained by reason and science, and that this world still has many terrifying mysteries that we do not know. For Maria, it was more than just an encounter. It was a terrifying supernatural experience that she would never forget. Griffith Park, with its natural beauty and tranquility during the day, became a place she did not dare to set foot in at night. Jack is a middle-aged man living in Arizona, one of the states famous for its wild lands and endless highways. He is a lover of long car trips and always enjoys the feeling of freedom when driving through deserted roads, especially on Route 66, one of the historic roads of America. For Jack, there is nothing more enjoyable than a long road trip, enjoying his favorite music and admiring the scenery on both sides of the road. One winter evening, Jack decided to drive from Arizona to New Mexico to visit an old friend. The drive wasn't very long, but to experience Route 66 at night, Jack chose to take the deserted road instead of the busy highway. By the time he left home, it was getting dark, and the air outside was chilly. The landscape around Route 66 was eerily quiet, with rolling hills and scattered treetops exposed in the dim moonlight. Jack drove for an hour. Only the steady sound of the engine echoed in the silence. The road ahead was empty. Only occasionally a few cars going the opposite direction passed by. The feeling of being alone in the middle of the long road made Jack feel light and comfortable. However, as the night deepened, a sense of unease gradually appeared in his heart. Around midnight, Jack began to notice something strange. He kept hearing light tapping noises, as if someone was tapping on the car door from outside. At first, he thought it might be the sound of an engine or the wind, but the knocking grew louder and more regular. It was coming from the passenger door, and Jack couldn't help but turn to look. But there was no one there. The door was still closed, and darkness enveloped the glass. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine, but he told himself that he was just tired and imagining things. About 30 minutes later, as Jack drove down a quieter stretch of road, the knocking came again. This time, it was as clear as if someone was standing right outside the car window. Jack stopped the car and looked around, but there was no sign of anyone nearby. The night sky was still, except for the gentle wind blowing across the deserted fields beside the road. But there was something strange as soon as Jack turned off the engine. The air became unusually cold, as if the temperature had dropped sharply in just a few seconds. Jack felt uneasy. He decided not to check any further, started the car, and continued his journey. But the feeling of unease did not leave him. When he glanced in the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the distance, right by the side of the road, in the dim light of the headlights. Jack's heart beat faster, but when he stopped the car to take a closer look, the figure had disappeared. Jack continued driving, but the heavy, anxious feeling did not leave him. He tried to listen to music to distract himself, but thoughts of that shadow kept lingering in his head. Maybe he was imagining things, but some part of him could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. As the night deepened, the silence became eerily quiet. Around midnight, Jack drove through an empty land with dry, rocky mountains and low bushes on both sides. Suddenly, in the distance, he saw a woman standing in the middle of the road, wearing a long white dress. She didn't move, just stood still, facing his car. Jack quickly stepped on the brakes, stopping the car just a few meters away from the woman. He could clearly see her through the headlights. Her face was pale and cold. Her eyes were empty and lifeless. Jack's heart pounded. He didn't know what to do. She didn't wave, didn't say anything, just stood there like a statue. His instincts told him not to get out of the car, but he couldn't just sit there. After a few minutes of debating, Jack decided to get out and ask if she needed help. As Jack opened the door and stepped out, a cold wind blew past. He approached the girl, but just a few steps away from reaching her, the woman suddenly disappeared, as if melting into thin air. Jack frantically turned his head to look around, but she had completely disappeared without a trace. His whole body turned cold, and he felt an invisible fear envelop him. Not wanting to stay in this place any longer, Jack quickly got back into the car, slammed the door shut, and stepped on the gas. The car sped away at high speed, but his mind was still filled with the image of that woman. What had happened? Had he encountered a real ghost? Or was it all just a figment of his imagination? Jack didn't dare look back in the rearview mirror. He just focused on driving and hoped to get to safety soon. But every time he glanced at the seat next to him, he had the feeling that someone was sitting there, staring at him. The next morning, when he arrived in New Mexico, Jack told his story to his friend. His friend listened quietly and smiled, saying to him, "Route 66 has a lot of ghost stories, especially that stretch of road. Many years ago, a woman died in a car accident on that stretch of road. It is said that her ghost still roams there, and people who pass by at night will see her." Jack shivered. He realized that what he had experienced was not a mistake or a figment of his imagination. The shadow and the woman on the road were not natural phenomena. He had truly encountered something supernatural, a ghost on Route 66. From that day on, Jack never dared to drive alone at night on Route 66 again. The memories of the woman in the white dress still haunted him, and every time he thought about it, he felt a cold fear creeping into his heart, just like that fateful night. Route 66, a road full of history, now carried with it, for Jack, terrifying mysteries that he would never forget. Tom is a middle-aged man living in a small, quiet town in Texas. He works for a construction company and often travels between neighborhoods to manage projects. Due to his busy work schedule, Tom often has to drive on deserted roads at night. For him, driving through vast expanses of land, surrounded by rolling grasslands and rolling hills, is nothing new. The endless Texas roads with the starry night sky give him a sense of comfort and freedom. One evening, after finishing work in a town about 3 hours' drive away, Tom decided to return home that night. The drive was long and lonely, but Tom was used to such journeys. By the time he left town, it was completely dark. Only the headlights of his car illuminated the road, and everything else was pitch black. Tom turned on the radio to ease the eerie silence, but the weak signal made the static even more eerie. After about an hour of driving, the road ahead became deserted. There were no houses or signs of life around, just vast stretches of deserted fields. Suddenly, Tom saw a dark figure appear on the side of the road ahead. As he got closer, he realized it was a man, standing right on the side of the road, waving his arms as if asking for a ride. The man was quite tall, wearing a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat that hid most of his face. Tom slowed down slowly, the car gradually stopping just a few meters away from the man. He looked more closely through the windshield, but something made him hesitate. The man stood still, his eyes never leaving Tom, but he did not move closer to the car. For a few short seconds, Tom felt a surge of unease. He wondered if he should help this man or not, but the feeling of invisible danger made him decide not to get out of the car. Tom rolled down the window a little, enough to speak to the man without leaving the safety of the car. "Do you need any help?" Tom asked, his voice echoing in the silence. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood still for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on Tom. The silence stretched on, making the atmosphere heavy. Finally, the man muttered something that Tom couldn't quite make out. His voice was deep and seemed to come from far away, despite the close distance between them. Tom felt a wave of fear wash over him. He decided not to prolong the conversation. "Sorry, I have to go," Tom said quickly, then rolled up the window, started the car, and drove away. Tom's car sped off into the darkness, leaving the man standing silently on the side of the road. His heart pounded in his chest, as if he had just escaped something very bad. However, after driving a short distance, he began to question himself. Perhaps he had been too sensitive and let unnecessary fear take over. Perhaps the man just needed help, and he had missed the opportunity to help someone in need. But it wasn't long before Tom noticed something else. When he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw an image that made his blood run cold. The man in the black coat was still standing there, but this time he wasn't standing on the side of the road. He was in the middle of the road, not far from his car. Even though Tom's car had already traveled quite a distance, the man's image was so clear that it was as if he had just teleported there. But it wasn't long before Tom noticed something else. When he touched in the rearview mirror, he saw an image that made his blood run cold. The man in the black coat was still standing there, but this time he wasn't standing on the side of the road. He was in the middle of the road, not far from his car. Even though Tom's car had already traveled quite a distance, the man's image was so clear that it was as if he had just teleported there. About half an hour later, Tom stopped at a small gas station on the side of the road. He felt the need to stop to calm down. The gas station was in the middle of nowhere, with only a few dim lights illuminating it. Tom stepped out of the car, feeling cold even though the night air wasn't that cold. As he entered the convenience store inside the gas station, the clerk behind the counter gave him a strange look. "You seem nervous," the clerk said, his voice tinged with concern. Tom shook his head, trying to suppress the fear in his heart. "I just saw a man standing on the side of the road, but he disappeared," Tom said, not wanting to go into details, but feeling the need to share a little to dispel his unease. The clerk fell silent, his face tense. "The man on the side of the road?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "You're not the first to mention this." Tom was surprised. "What are you talking about?" The employee lowered his voice, moved closer and said, "I have worked at this gas station for many years, and many drivers have told me about a mysterious man on the side of the road on this stretch of road. They all described him wearing a black coat, standing there waving his hands, and when they looked back, he disappeared. Some people say he is the ghost of someone who had an accident here many years ago. But what happened to him, no one knows." Tom felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to the clerk's words. What he had just experienced was not just his own imagination, but perhaps something strange had really happened on this stretch of road. He left the gas station with a heavy heart and continued driving home. For the rest of the journey, Tom could not stop thinking about the man on the side of the road. Even though he tried to push that image out of his mind, the fear still haunted him, as if there was a dark shadow following his every step. When he got home, Tom didn't dare tell anyone the story, fearing that they would think he was paranoid. But from then on, every time he drove down the deserted road at night, Tom always felt an invisible presence watching him. The dark nights on the Texas highway were no longer as peaceful as they used to be, and the man by the side of the road, with his mysterious eyes and inexplicable presence, still haunted Tom's mind. The ghost of that stretch of road, whether real or just an urban legend, has become part of the horror stories in the minds of nighttime drivers. And Tom, like many others, has become part of that story. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to wait for the next videos. If you find my story interesting, please like and subscribe to wait for more interesting stories.